You think you know what Jesus looked like? Think again. What you're about to discover might completely change the image you've held in your mind your entire life. Was Jesus truly the way we've come to picture him in paintings, films, and Sunday school stories? Or have we overlooked a deeper truth hidden in plain sight? There exists a letter, a rare, astonishing document written by Pontius Pilate himself, the Roman governor of Judea, addressed directly to Emperor Tiberius. In it, Pilate describes Jesus in vivid detail, details that don't even appear in the Gospels. He writes of Jesus' face, his skin color, his bearing, his presence. He speaks of his miracles, his trial, his crucifixion, and, believe it or not, his resurrection. But what exactly did Pilate say? What did he dare report to the most powerful man in the Roman world about the physical appearance and divine mystery of the Son of God? Pilate begins his letter with a formal tone, but there's something urgent in his words. You can feel it. Greetings, Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary. I feel compelled to recount them in detail. I believe what has taken place here may one day impact the destiny of the empire. He continues almost as if shaken by an unseen weight. It seems as though the gods have turned their backs on us. I'm tempted to say the day I succeeded Valerius as governor of Judea was cursed. Since that moment, my life has been marked by unrest, by inexplicable troubles. Pilate recalls his arrival in Jerusalem, a city tense, spiritual, and volatile. To assert his authority, he took over the praetorium and planned a grand banquet. He invited the Tetrarch of Galilee, the high priest, and other influential leaders. But then, something strange happened. When the hour of the banquet arrived, no one came. Why? That moment would be the first of many unsettling signs. What happened next only deepened my unease. When none of the invited guests showed up to the banquet, I took it as a personal insult, not just to me, but to the authority of Rome itself, a blatant act of disrespect. A few days later, the high priest finally came to visit. His demeanor was grave, but behind his solemn face, I sensed deception. He claimed his religion forbade him from dining with Romans. It was a convenient excuse, one steeped in piety, but his eyes betrayed him. I saw right through it. I accepted his explanation outwardly, but inwardly it was clear. This man, and those aligned with him, harbored deep resentment toward our rule. Their loyalty lay not with Rome, but with their own ambition. I must advise, with all seriousness, that Rome keep a wary eye on the high priests of Judea. These men, cloaked in religion, would sell their own mothers for power, for wealth. They are dangerous. Of all the territories we have conquered, Jerusalem is the most volatile. The people are restless, rebellious. I live with the constant fear that a single spark could ignite an uprising. My military strength here is weak. I have only 1 centurion and 100 men under my command. I pleaded with the governor of Syria for reinforcements, but he sent word back that he could barely protect his own region. Rome wants to expand, but I fear our hunger for dominion may outpace our ability to defend what we've already claimed. This imbalance, if it continues, could spell the eventual downfall of the empire. To avoid inciting unrest, I have kept my distance from the people. The priests hold sway over them, and I fear what they might stir up behind closed doors. Still, I've made every effort to understand this strange, stubborn population. And one rumor, above all others, began to circulate like wildfire through the streets and synagogues. They spoke of a young man from Galilee, a teacher, a prophet, a man who preached a new doctrine in the name of a God who had supposedly sent him. At first, I suspected he might be fomenting resistance, another agitator using divine claims to rally the masses. But the more I listened, the more I learned. I realized something astonishing. Jesus of Nazareth was no enemy of Rome. If anything, he seemed more at odds with the Jewish leaders than with us. One afternoon, as I passed through the city square, I noticed a crowd, unusually quiet, yet deeply attentive. At the center, leaning casually against a tree, stood a young man, speaking with calm authority. There was something about him, a presence, that set him apart from everyone else. It didn't surprise me when I learned who he was. I chose not to interrupt. I moved on. But I ordered my personal secretary, Manlius, to remain behind, to stay in the crowd and listen. Manlius is no ordinary aide. He is the grandson of a once notorious conspirator who waited years for Catiline in the hills of Etruria. He speaks Hebrew fluently, and above all, I trust him implicitly. Later that evening, Manlius returned to the Praetorium. What he told me about Jesus would stay with me for the rest of my life. I've studied the works of philosophers, from the pages of Socrates to the dialogues of Plato. Yet in all my life, I have never encountered wisdom as piercing, as disarming, as the words spoken by Jesus of Nazareth. One day, amid the usual unrest in the city, a Jewish rebel tried to trap him with a question meant to provoke rebellion. "Is it lawful," the man asked, "to pay taxes to Caesar?" Jesus turned to him and answered, calmly, without anger, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." That one sentence struck me, not just for its diplomacy, but for its truth. That wisdom, that clarity was what led me to protect the Nazarene. I had the power to arrest him, to exile him to the cold outposts of Pontus. But I would not, I could not, because to do so would be unjust. And justice, true justice, is a cornerstone of Roman law, the very foundation of our governance. Jesus was no revolutionary. He stirred hearts. Yes, he challenged minds, but he did not stir rebellion. He was no threat to Rome. Quietly, and perhaps without him even realizing it, I extended him a shield, a freedom to speak, to gather, to choose his followers, to teach. I allowed it, believing in the strength of our republic. But if, one day, may the gods forbid, the old religion of our fathers is overtaken by this new faith, it will not be because of swords or armies. It will be because of this very tolerance. And I, Pontius Pilate, a mere instrument of fate, will have played a part in what the Jews call providence, and what we Romans simply call destiny. Of course, not everyone shared my restraint. The wealthier and more powerful among the Jews, the priests, the Pharisees, grew furious with the freedom I allowed him. Jesus did not flatter them, he confronted them. And to me, that was reason enough to let him be. He looked into their eyes and said, "You are like serpents, whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but full of decay within." He scorned their arrogance. He denounced their rituals when divorced from humility. He taught that before God, the lowliest man who walks in humility is greater than the highest seat at a banquet. Every day, the Praetorium received fresh complaints, letters, visits, accusations. They warned me something terrible would happen to him. They reminded me of Jerusalem's history, how prophets had been stoned to death in its streets. There was even talk of a petition to Caesar. But Rome stood by me. The Senate affirmed my decisions. They promised reinforcements after the Persian campaign, for I had not enough soldiers to contain even a whisper of rebellion. Still, I knew I had to act, not to silence Jesus, but to preserve peace. I sent word, requesting that he meet me at the Praetorium, and he came. Now, I am of Roman and Spanish blood. I do not fear easily. I do not tremble in the face of men. But as I stood on the marble balcony and Jesus approached, I felt something I had never known. It was as if my feet had fused to the stone beneath me. My body trembled, like a guilty man standing before judgment. And yet, the Nazarene stood calm, still, serene, as if made of pure light. He didn't need to speak. He simply raised his hand in quiet acknowledgement, as if to say, "I am here." In that moment, I was both awestruck and ashamed. I saw a presence that no sculptor had ever captured in the form of a god. He was nothing like the legends of Olympus, and yet far more divine. I finally summoned the courage to speak. "Jesus of Nazareth, for 3 years, I've allowed you complete freedom. I have no regrets. Your words carry wisdom, greater than even the teachings of Socrates and Plato. Whether you've read them or not, your speech carries both simplicity and greatness. The Emperor is aware of your influence, and as his representative, I am content to have protected you." But then I added, with a heavy heart, "Still, your words have stirred powerful enemies. Socrates too had enemies, and he died for it. Yours are even more furious. Some accuse me of conspiring with you, of weakening the last threads of Roman control over these people. I urge you, not as a threat, but as a warning, be careful. Be wise. Pride is a tool your enemies may wield to rouse the crowd, and if they succeed, I may be forced to act according to the law. Jesus looked at me with compassion, not fear, and he answered, "Ruler of the earth, your words are not born of true wisdom. Ask Mount Tabor to stop in the valley, and it will tell you it obeys the laws of nature and the laws of the God who created it. Only he knows where the waters will flow. I tell you this truth, before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the righteous will be shed, but not yours." I was moved, more than I had expected. Looking into his eyes, I said, "Your wisdom surpasses that of these rebellious Pharisees, men who exploit the freedom Rome has so generously granted them. They conspire against Caesar. They poison the hearts of the people, painting him as a tyrant who seeks their destruction." I paused, then added with quiet disgust, "They are blind to their own hypocrisy. Sometimes the wolf wears a sheep's skin, and these men, under a cloak of holiness, pursue wicked ends." I promised him protection. "My praetorium will be your sanctuary, day and night. No harm will come to you here." But Jesus, I never calm, unshaken by power or threats, simply shook his head and smiled, not a mocking smile, a sorrowful, knowing one. When the time comes, he said, "There will be no refuge for the Son of Man, not on this earth, nor beneath it. The true refuge lies in the heavens." He raised his hand and pointed upward. "What the prophets have written will be fulfilled." Something inside me stirred, fear, admiration. A man like this, so serene in the face of destiny, unnerved me. So I stiffened, fell back on my authority, and replied with formality, "You leave me no choice. I must now turn my request into a command. The security of this province, under my watch, depends on it. You must be cautious with your words. You know the consequences. I bid you farewell. May happiness go with you." Jesus answered softly, "Prince of the earth, I did not come to bring unrest, but peace, love, and charity." I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought tranquility to the empire. Then he paused, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "The persecutions you fear will not be because of me, but I know I must endure them. For the sake of others, I follow only the will of my Father, who has shown me the path I must walk." And then, as if the moment had passed from history into legend, he turned and walked away, like light fading on the horizon. And as strange as it sounds, I felt relief. His presence was too much, too heavy, too pure. Later, Herod came to see me, old, arrogant, petty. He had joined the ranks of Jesus' enemies, not out of conviction, but revenge. Had the decision been his alone, Jesus would have been executed without a second thought. But Herod, despite all his pomp, hesitated. He feared losing favor with the Senate. Perhaps, like me, he feared Jesus too. But no Roman official could ever admit to fearing a Jew. As Herod rose to leave after a conversation filled with empty words, he turned and asked casually, "What do you think of the Nazarene?" I answered honestly, "He seems like one of those rare sages who appear from time to time in great civilizations. His teachings are spiritual, not political, and Rome sees no reason to silence him. His actions do not warrant punishment." Herod smirked, a thin, mocking smile. He bowed, heavy with irony, and left without another word. But the danger was growing. Passover was approaching, and as always, the city swelled with pilgrims and unrest. Crowds surged through the streets, shouting, chanting, calling for blood, calling for Jesus. My informants whispered dark truths. The temple treasury, the sacred storehouse, had been used to bribe the mob, and now a Roman centurion had been publicly humiliated, insulted in the streets with no consequence. I knew what this meant. The peace of the city and the honor of Rome were at stake. I sent word to the governor of Syria, begging for reinforcements, 100 foot soldiers, 100 cavalry. His response, a refusal. He had no men to spare. I was alone, surrounded by a few loyal veterans, stationed in a city that seethed with hostility and rebellion. I had neither the strength to crush an uprising, nor the political backing to prevent one. All I could do was endure. Then came the breaking point. Jesus of Nazareth was arrested, not for a crime of violence or insurrection, but under the pretense of being a rebel, a threat to Roman order. Of course, the accusers knew better. They had no reason to fear the praetorium, but with their leaders behind them, they saw an opportunity and seized it. They hurled their voices like weapons. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And so it was. Three powerful factions, normally divided, united against one man. The Herodians, the Sadducees, the Pharisees. The Herodians and Sadducees took a duplicitous stance. They despised Jesus, yes, but they also harbored deep resentment toward Rome. They had never forgiven me for marching into the holy city with imperial banners, images of the emperor held high, a grave misstep on my part, one they deemed sacrilege. And though I had long since repented of that error, they had not forgotten. Meanwhile, the Pharisees, already bitter enemies of Jesus, found fresh reason to oppose me. I had dared suggest using a portion of the temple's treasury for public works. A suggestion, nothing more, but to them, it was intolerable. And Jesus, he had denounced them in every town he visited for 3 years, calling out their hypocrisy, their pride, their corruption. So now, the religious elite wanted blood. The restless masses wanted spectacle. And I was caught in the middle of it all, a governor with no reinforcements, surrounded by chaos. To make matters worse, the people, reckless and easily swayed, were always one rumor away from revolt. The city was combustible. Jesus was dragged before the high priest Caiaphas, who swiftly pronounced a sentence of death. But in a move of calculated submission, he sent Jesus back to me, asking me to confirm the sentence and order the execution. I refused. I stated plainly, Jesus was a Galilean, and therefore his case fell under Herod's jurisdiction. I sent him to Herod. But Herod, hiding behind a false humility and feigned respect for Roman law, washed his hands of the matter. He sent Jesus right back to me, placing the full weight of this terrible decision in my hands. By then, my palace had become a fortress. The crowd outside swelled by the hour. Rebels, agitators, pilgrims, even people descending from the mountains of Nazareth filled the streets. It felt as though the whole of Judea had converged on Jerusalem. A mystic, some said a seer, fell at my feet weeping. Eyes wild with terror, she begged me, "Do not touch this man, he is sacred. Last night I saw him walking on water, flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the storm, and the waves obeyed. I saw blood in the rivers, statues of Caesar shedding tears, the sun rising like a virgin clothed in mourning. If you do not heed your wife's warnings, a great misfortune awaits you. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate. Fear the thrones of Caesar." Even the marble steps of the Praetorium trembled beneath the weight of the surging mob. Jesus was brought back to me, silent, bruised, unbroken. I walked into the Hall of Justice, guarded but exposed. The crowd roared like a storm pressing against the stone walls. I raised my voice above the chaos. "What do you want from me?" Their answer was deafening. "Death!" I demanded reason. "What crime has he committed?" They shouted, "He blasphemed. He prophesied the destruction of the temple. He called himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews." I stood firm. Roman law does not condemn a man to death for such things. But my words were drowned out. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The chant grew louder, a tidal wave of fury pounding the very palace walls. And amid the storm, Jesus stood still, serene, silent, the only soul unshaken. After many failed attempts to shield him from the bloodlust of his enemies, I made what felt like my last desperate move. It was custom during Passover to release one prisoner to the people. A gesture of goodwill, I offered them Jesus. But they screamed for crucifixion. They had made up their minds, and I was running out of time. I tried to reason with them. Desperately, I reminded the crowd and their leaders that their own laws were being ignored. I told them, "According to your law, no judge may condemn a man without first fasting for an entire day." I explained that a death sentence required the full consent of the Sanhedrin and the personal signature of its president. I pointed out that no execution was to be carried out on the same day the sentence was passed. There were rules, safeguards, justice. I told them how a man was supposed to stand at the court's entrance with a banner, how another, on horseback, would ride through the streets announcing the name of the condemned, his crime, and the witnesses, asking if anyone could testify in his favor. And even as he walked to his death, the condemned man had the right to return up to 3 times to speak in his defense. I gave them their law, their own sacred order. But it meant nothing. The answer remained the same. Relentless, bloodthirsty. Crucify him! Crucify him! I thought perhaps a scourging might satisfy them. A show of force. So I ordered Jesus to be flogged. But it only made them angrier. As the cries grew louder, more violent, more frenzied, I did what I could to remove myself from the madness. I asked for a basin. Before the furious mob, I washed my hands and declared, I find no fault in this man. His blood is not on my hands. But my words fell flat. His fate was already sealed. I've seen riots. I've witnessed the fury of mobs in Pannonia and the political chaos of the Roman Forum. But nothing compared to that day. It felt like hell had emptied itself into the streets of Jerusalem. The crowd wasn't just moving. It was twisting, writhing, roaring like a living beast. From the city gates to the slopes of Mount Zion, they surged in waves, shouting, crying, seething with a kind of hatred I had never seen before. The sky dimmed, like a winter evening settling over the land. It reminded me of the day Julius Caesar was killed. Ironically, it was also the Ides of March. I stood alone in the shadows of my basilica, watching as the innocent Nazarene was led away to die. Jerusalem was a ghost town. Its people poured through the dark gates toward Golgotha, leaving behind only silence and sorrow. My soul felt strangely tethered to Calvary. The centurion struggled to maintain order, but chaos clung to everything, and I was utterly alone. A weight settled on my chest, heavy and cold. What I was witnessing was not the justice of men. It was a divine drama, something beyond politics, beyond empires. From Golgotha, the sounds of agony rose with the wind. Not just screams, but something deeper, a suffering the earth itself seemed to mourn. Dark clouds gathered above the temple. The sky turned black. It was as if a great curtain had been drawn over the world. I would later hear that Dionysius the Patriarch cried out, "Either the Creator is suffering, or the universe is unraveling." An earthquake struck Lower Egypt. People fled in terror. Even the most hardened, superstitious Jews were overcome with fear. A man named Balthazar, a learned Jew from Antioch, and one of Jesus' close companions, was found dead. Some said he died from grief, others from the shock of what was happening. That night, just after sunset, I wrapped myself in my cloak and walked into the heart of the city. I made my way toward the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was complete. The crowd, though slowly dispersing, wore a haunted expression, not of triumph, but regret. Something had shifted. I passed members of my own Roman guard. They moved silently, their faces pale. Even the standard bearer had veiled the eagle in black, a gesture of mourning. I overheard Jewish soldiers speaking in hushed tones, some in awe, some in fear. A few spoke of miracles, as if their gods had whispered something they couldn't quite understand. People stopped and stared at Mount Calvary as if waiting for the heavens to open again. I returned to the Praetorium with a heavy heart. As I ascended the blood-stained marble steps, I saw an elderly man on his knees praying. He was surrounded by Romans. Many were crying. He looked up at me through tears and then collapsed at my feet, weeping. And I, already burdened beyond words, wept with him. I had never seen anything like it. The same crowd that had condemned Jesus was now vanishing in shame. I heard rumors that some of them were rinsing their mouths with vinegar, a cryptic ritual, maybe tied to something Jesus had said about resurrection and the separation of the living from the dead. If it was true, it happened right there, in front of them all. Once I'd composed myself, I asked the old man, "Father, who are you? What do you want?" He replied, "I am Joseph of Arimathea. I come to ask permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted it without hesitation, and I ordered my officer Melius to send soldiers to guard the tomb, to prevent it from being desecrated. A few days later, the tomb was empty, and his disciples began to whisper, then proclaim that Jesus had risen, just as he said he would. The aftermath stirred even more unrest than his death. I investigated the matter with all the authority I had. You are free to examine the facts for yourself. Judge my actions if you wish. Herod claimed that Joseph used his personal tomb for the burial. Whether he knew more than he revealed, Whether he had some plan regarding the resurrection, I cannot say, but I will never forget the day Rome crucified a righteous man, and the heavens responded. Not long after the crucifixion, a priest came to the praetorium. He was visibly anxious. He warned me that Jesus' disciples might attempt to steal the body, and then claim he had risen, just as he had prophesied, just as they deeply believed he would. To prevent such a deception, I directed the priest to Captain Marcus. I ordered him to assign as many Jewish guards as needed around the tomb. This way, if anything happened, the responsibility would fall upon them, not on Rome. But when the report came that the tomb was empty, my concern turned to dread. I immediately summoned Marcus, who informed me he had placed his most trusted officer, Lieutenant Ben Isham, in charge of the guard, with 100 men. He told me they had been shaken to their core by something they could not explain. I called for Isham. When he arrived, he recounted the event with solemn sincerity. He said that around the 4th watch of the night, a soft, radiant light began to rise above the tomb. Not harsh, not like fire, but gentle, almost enchanting. At first, he thought it might be women coming to anoint the body, as was their custom. But he couldn't understand how they could have passed the guards unnoticed. And then, the entire place lit up. What he saw next defied all reason. He described a vision, or perhaps a reality, of the dead rising, figures in burial shrouds, appearing youthful, joyful, as if resurrected themselves. He said heavenly music, a music unlike anything he had ever heard, filled the air. It felt, he said, as though the sky itself was praising God. Then, the earth began to tremble. The ground moved beneath his feet, and he collapsed, unable to stand. He fainted. When he awoke, he was lying face down in the dust. I asked if perhaps what he saw was simply the sunrise. He shook his head. At first, yes, he had wondered that, but the darkness lingered. It was too early, and the light he saw did not come from the east. I asked if the dizziness could have come from standing too fast. He replied that he hadn't slept, knew the punishment for falling asleep on duty was death. Some of his men, he admitted, had slept, but he had not closed his eyes once. I asked how long the strange light lasted. He couldn't say for sure, but he estimated nearly an hour passed before true daylight overtook it. Had he approached the tomb afterward? He had been too afraid. And once reinforcements arrived, they returned to the barracks immediately. I asked if the priests had spoken with him. He nodded. Yes, they had. They pressured him to lie, to say it was an earthquake, to claim that the guards had fallen asleep. They even offered him money if only he would testify that the disciples had stolen the body. But he refused. He had seen no disciples. He hadn't even realized the body was gone until he was told. I asked what the priests themselves believed. He said some of them, in private, had begun to say that Jesus may not have been an ordinary man, that he wasn't Mary's son in the way people assumed. They whispered that he might have been a divine being, the same presence who appeared in ages past to Abraham, to Lot, and in other mysterious moments of history. If their theory held even a grain of truth, then the events surrounding this man made terrifying sense. Because Jesus commanded the elements like a sculptor commands clay. He turned water into wine. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He calmed the winds and the seas. He summoned fish that carried coins in their mouths. And for these wonders, not for any crime, he was condemned. Thousands had seen his works. Even his enemies could not deny them. He had broken no Roman law. He had harmed no one. But his very presence, his very power, stirred the world. And now, as I reflect on all I saw, I find myself repeating the words of one of my own men, spoken at the foot of the cross. Truly, this was the Son of God. I once described Jesus of Nazareth in a report to Caesar. I wrote that he stood of average height, but there was nothing average about him. He carried himself with calm authority. Wherever he walked, people noticed. His face radiated gentleness and peace. Even under pressure, he never lost that serene expression. His eyes, the most unforgettable part, looked at people not with judgment, but with a kind of deep understanding, as though he saw through them, not to condemn, but to love. His hair was long and soft, slightly wavy, falling over his shoulders like woven silk. Its color, a light chestnut, almost golden, unusual among the people of this land. And his eyes, They were said to shift in hue, from warm hazel to piercing blue, depending on the light, or perhaps the soul looking into them. They were eyes that held both wisdom and mercy. And when he looked at you, it felt as if heaven itself had paused and was watching with him.